Broadcasting live. It's America's longest running talk show on computers. It's Computer America, bringing you the biggest names in technology with guest interviews, new products, and your emails. Listen live at computeramerica.com on any device around the world. Email the show at live@computeramerica.com or find us on social media. Be sure to check out our website for contests, giveaways, show notes, live video stream, podcasts, and more. You're listening to Computer America.
Hello and welcome into the Computer America Show. We are the nation's longest running, nationally syndicated radio talk show on computers and technology. Thank you for joining us once again, and I hope all of you are having a great week as we get things kicked off here with a great guest, and we're going to be talking about security and more about the banking side. And this could be obviously very, very important for those of you who are concerned with this kind of thing, and we see constant threats to any security measure that these companies seem to be able to put out. It's a constant struggle. So being able to talk about this, it's going to be a lot of fun, and we'll be talking to the authentication strategist and vice president of NuData Security in just a moment for NuData Security. But before we do that, a couple of things I want to mention, including computeramerica.com. That's where you'll find anything and everything for today's show, be it a link to our guest website, be it any articles that we cover later on in the program. Just anything we do here on the program can be found right there on our homepage. Also, be sure to check out the social media contest where, we give away a prize every single Friday to a lucky listener. And that is, of course, brought to you by Logitech. And give that away every Friday. Check that out. Very easy to enter. And then the last thing is, of course, the video feed where you can watch Computer America as well as listen to the show. Still a radio program, but it's just another thing that we like to offer here. Hey, for your pleasure. Check it out. So with all that said, hey, my name is Ben Grossman. I'm your host. And we're going to get started here with, again, our guest today. NuData Security. So to tell us all about who they are, where they came from, and more is Robert Capps, and he is the authentication strategist and vice president of NuData Security. So Robert, how you doing? Welcome onto the program. Great. So why don't we go ahead and start with a bit of background for those of us who may not have heard about NuData Security. When did you guys get started?
Sure. Yeah. So we got started about the time that the last financial meltdown happened. So the company was formed in 2008, focused in on identification of actual end users as they're trying to interact with websites. Previously technologies out there identified their device that was connecting in, and they verified the credentials that they were using, but no one actually was trying to figure out, is that human attached to that device the right human? And so we've spent many years developing the technology to be able to decide whether or not that is the case with an individual logging into a website or a mobile application.
Sounds like it could be very complicated work because, there's a lot of very easy indicators for a piece of technology, be it a phone, a computer, what have you. And, that could be everything from the IP address to individual serial numbers, that are specific to that device. Humans aren't that convenient. Humans, don't have a big stamp on their forehead and say, this is who I am. I mean, why did you feel that this was the way that security had to go? Because, as I said before, a lot of different companies are working on a lot of different angles for security, and actually identifying the individual isn't always the focus of these companies.
Well, it's a hard problem. As you said, there's no barcode or RFID chip that you can just scan and say, oh, yep, that's Robert, and that he should be getting access to that account. You have to look a lot deeper, and humans are messy biological creatures. They don't do the same thing the same way every single time. But they do have habits and behaviors, and they do have physiology, all of which is measurable and comparable to previous interactions. And so even though no two human interactions doing the same thing, the same function will look exactly alike, there's enough overlap and statistical probability can give us a pretty clear picture as to whether or not the person that's trying to perform this function is the right person, based upon how do they hold their device, how do they interact with it, how fast they type their password. We can even look at things like force feedback on a screen and how big their fingers are on, as they push the buttons on a touch screen. Those are all measurable data points that can be used to ascertain one's identity, or at least that this is the right human.
Yeah, I have, now that you mentioned, I have heard of other, devices using something like that, and I always wondered of their effectiveness because I hadn't seen widespread adoption. Things like, cars that would only start if the person sitting in the driver's seat weighed similar to the person who drove it previously, and it wouldn't activate, or at least it wouldn't turn on the car if the person suddenly dropped 50 pounds. It just wouldn't really make sense. Uh, Little features like that, and I guess it's true. But just to be clear, I mean, you said you started back in 2008.
Yep.
Part of me feels like the kind of data that you want to analyze and identify people with, was that available to you in 2008, or was that something that over the past 5 or 6 years, the idea of big data, really settled in? I mean, was that what you
Yeah.
were doing in 2008?
Well, in 2008, it was really, is this a human or not a human? And layering on top of that, device access analytics, layering on top of that behavioral analytics, you could start to get a picture of that consumer. With the advent of things like native mobile applications on a mobile device and additional APIs being bundled into the operating systems and browsers of modern computing devices, those signals have gotten much more broad. There's a lot more that you can look at. And the funny thing is, this isn't necessarily about big data. It's about right data. Pulling in the right pieces of data to allow you to identify that consumer in a quick fashion, in an accurate fashion, is sort of the the magic in a solution like that. Because the more data you try to analyze in one fell swoop, the longer that analysis takes. And when when you're trying to make a decision around an authentication or a checkout event or a credit card transaction, you don't have 10 or 20 seconds to get an answer. You've got milliseconds. And so, knowing what data to collect and analyze is probably as important as having an analytical engine itself.
Right. So let's go ahead and take this conversation to some of the things that you try to protect people from, because things like fraudulent access to accounts. That's I'm sure that's one part of what you do, and then you have things that it's instead of just being an individual, we've seen entire groups of or organizations sprout up all around accessing tons of people's profiles, not just one individual. So let's talk about a bank Trojan. I think that our audience, if they're longtime listeners, they should have heard what a Trojan is in terms of a computer Trojan, where comes in surreptitiously. Maybe it sends data out, maybe it just gives access to a hacker who maybe implanted it, like a Trojan horse, that kind of thing. Tell us about a bank Trojan. How is that similar or different?
Well, it's based on function. What is the ultimate goal of the Trojan or the malicious software that's deployed on that end user's computing device? Whether it's for theft of credentials to attack e-commerce sites, or theft of information to attack financial services. The focus of the malicious software is really how it gets categorized as a bank Trojan or something else. But at the end of the day, malicious software is a massive threat to end users and their computing systems, because once their machine has been compromised by some sort of malicious software like a banking Trojan, it opens them up to a tremendous number of threats and really puts them in a position of vulnerability when it comes to their private data, as well as the access they have to financial services accounts, their own work email, their work, other resources at work, and so on and so forth. And it's not just limited to their own. You think about families. Mom and dad probably have tax return records, which include their kids' social security numbers and birthdays and other sort of private, confidential information that could also be compromised from an inadvertent installation of malicious software on a parent's machine. So
Right.
it goes way beyond just your own personal impact. If you've got personal information of other people on your computer or you access it, that can also be accessed by malicious individuals, cyber criminals, if they get access to your machine.
Right. So let's talk about, we'll get a little bit more specific, but we have here a question about the current bank Trojan leveraged by, and I'll admit I have yet to hear of this, this organization, Silence, as I understand it. Is there something special about them, or what is it that they do?
Yeah, so the these names, it's not like these groups go out there and start printing business cards with their name on them.
Right.
They're often coined by researchers who discover these groups or these methods. So they may not identify themselves as Silence, but it's definitely a catchy name for the rest of us to call them. They may be one group. They may be multiple groups that are using similar techniques and technologies. It's hard to tell, and there's definitely people that spend their entire career going after these guys and figuring it out. And while I thank them for that, I'm not in a position to say whether or not it's one or more groups. But what makes these guys unique is they've typically gone after targets that other cyber criminals haven't. So they're definitely hitting banks in the Russian territories, which has typically been a hands-off sort of scenario. When you deal with Eastern European and Russian cyber criminals, they don't typically target banks within their own country. In Russia and some of the Russian territories, it is not illegal to hack and attack foreign companies. It is illegal to hack and attack domestically. And so traditionally, we've not seen those attacks happening against Russian targets. In this case, we definitely see people attacking Russian targets. So that may or may not indicate Russian nationals' involvement, or it could be a splinter group of hackers that just think they're above the law, which could be the case. What's interesting here is they haven't been going after individual users per se. They've been going after the financial services companies themselves, using multi-layered attacks, including business email compromise, phishing, social engineering, and then, of course, the malware infection, with the intent of watching employees inside the organization and understanding how they do business, what safeguards exist, when big transfers happen. And they're looking for vulnerabilities that they can exploit remotely to steal money, to wire money out of accounts. In the case of some of the larger governmental level attacks, not necessarily attributed to the Silence Group and their Trojans, but to others that are acting in similar ways, even accessing the SWIFT international money movement systems of governments around the world to move hundreds of millions of dollars out of their accounts and into those of malicious actors. So, in this case, it's all about espionage, understanding the target's behavior, and then going through the process to extract as much value with one single attack as possible. And so that's stood out as being very unique in this case.
Right. Yeah. And if you could expand a little bit more on this, because about exactly a week ago, we covered an article that was actually done by Engadget, and it was about Russian hackers were stealing $10 million through ATMs in Eastern Europe, where they were targeting the interbank transfer systems, where it was still like American money, but it was they said it was the first data star network, which transfers money between ATMs, using that kind of thing. Was this the same thing, or is it just any part of the banking system can be vulnerable to any number of groups, and this is just a coincidence that it was another group?
Again, it's really hard to tell which groups are associated
Right.
to each other and which techniques are being used by which groups, because again, they don't tend to put a stamp on their work to claim credit. These guys tend not to be boastful and bragful, and they tend not to try and draw attention to themselves. They're after money, not notoriety. What we've seen in past hacks, if you've been around the industry since the late '90s, when the commercial internet really got its feet underneath it, a lot of the hacks are about defacements and taking claim over this sort of intrusion.
Yeah.
It was akin to basically tagging your name on the side of a brick wall. Nowadays, it's less about notoriety, and it's a lot more about financial gain. And so you really can't go around attributing your crimes to yourself if you want to stay gainfully successful in any crime.
Probably above the law, and you're right that being a group that attacks Russia there's a lot of rules that we've seen kind of put forth that you don't want to hack the country that you're in, because it's much harder to punish these criminals if they are in another country. Just the further where you attack, the safer you are. And yeah, but this is very interesting. So so who were they exactly targeting with these hacks? I mean, were individuals compromised, or was it again just the higher levels of the bank system?
Yeah, so I mean, the information that's been that's made its way out into the public, and some of the partially non-public information that's come out, really focused in on this group of individuals, focusing in on the actual banking systems themselves, exploiting process and system loopholes in those systems. They weren't necessarily attacks on any individual customer in the traditional sense that we have seen in the industry. That doesn't mean there haven't been compromises of an individual's account. If you have access to internal systems, there's nothing keeping you from going in and changing the credentials on a user's account to something else, allowing you to log in and wire money out. But in most cases where you have access to core banking infrastructure and systems, and the passwords that have been compromised by watching legitimate employees logging into these core systems, you really don't have to go down to the individual user level.
Gotcha.
You can transfer money out of their accounts, wire them directly from the systems, and potentially impersonate even the supervisors that have to approve large dollar wires. So the more access they have, the more likely it's going to be an internal compromise than trying to access individual accounts from the outside.
So they were able to get these credentials. They used obviously some pretty sophisticated or simple, however you want to look at it, software to gain these. And what do you think they're doing with them? Do you think they're sitting, because we've heard cases of advanced persistent threats and things like that where maybe they'll sit on them, they'll act like nothing's wrong, and then much later down the road, when it's people kind of let their guard down, then they strike. What do you think they're doing with them? Are they actively using them?
Yeah, so I mean, the silence malware attacks, Trojan attacks, really are about it's a textbook APT attack, advanced persistent threat. What happens is the attackers are getting access to an email account, legitimate email account in the institution through a business email compromise. Whether that's using a stolen credential from somewhere else, whether that's using phishing against individual people trying to get access to their email accounts, whether it's malware on the machines deployed through other mechanisms that give remote access to a legitimate user PC, they get access to the email account of a legitimate bank employee. From there, they end up sending out phishing emails and malware laden emails to individual employees from the employee accounts. They often go, they're already within the firewall and those are sent, so email filtering doesn't necessarily pick up on those things. And all the things that organizations do to train their employees: don't open attachments from the outside, don't open them from people you don't know, don't follow links to third-party sites. A lot of those educational things we give to our users aren't going to protect them from an email that originates from within the system and looks like a legitimate request. So you get a number of employees that will then start accessing this information and downloading the malicious software into their machine, compromising it, thus pushing the fraudsters deeper into the network. Once that happens, they sit and they watch. They log the keystrokes of the user, so they get their credentials, their usernames, their passwords. They're doing video recordings of their screens and potentially even of the user, audio and video, figuring out what they do on a daily basis, what processes sit in place, and they analyze all this data, and they sit and they wait for the exact right time to attack the organization. Maybe it's during a holiday, maybe it's during a planned fire drill, when everybody's out of the building. And they'll then hit all the machines they need to hit simultaneously with their other compatriots, and they'll make those wire transfers happen. They'll do the withdrawals. They'll put the money into the accounts that have been set up to receive them, where they may have ATM cards or other sort of access devices already in the hands of fraudsters. They might change the ATM networks themselves so that at a given point in time, each ATM starts spitting out 5,000 US dollars or 10,000 euro. to a waiting cyber criminal that's been standing at the ATM machine at the appointed place and time to pick up the money. There's all these ways that they can then use their access to cash out.
Yeah, and some of those hacks on the individual ATM levels, some of those were some of the weirdest security flaws I've seen in banking. Where the one I remember most vividly was a couple of years ago, where they were able to take any card with a magnetic strip, essentially copy any kind of data onto that magnetic strip, be it a legitimate card holder or something like that. And again, it could be like a gift card to wherever. And they essentially set the withdrawal limit to undefined, and they were able to withdraw the entirety of the ATM using any card. It was extremely weird.
Yeah, I mean, that takes a lot of testing and planning and knowledge of the internal workings of those systems to be able to craft an attack that is that precise. And in these cases, you're talking about business logic that was missing critical safeguards to protect the system from mass financial loss. Like you should never encode a withdrawal limit on the mag stripe of a card because it's so easy to change or remove.
Right.
The interesting part, I spent about 8 or 9 years in financial services security, and we would see a lot of people encoding the bank information on the back of hotel key cards, which are the exact same ISO specification as a credit card or an ATM card. And so, there's a ready supply of these mag stripe plastic cards at every hotel front desk. So if you're a frequent traveler, you start amassing hundreds of these in a shoebox somewhere. It's not hard for the bad guys to get their hands on those as well to re-encode credit card information. Go ahead.
It was very interesting, but I just kind of wanted to get into, obviously, NuData Security, and it sounds like you have a solution for this kind of thing, because, I think that what you described earlier on in the interview could be, kind of the ultimate solution to this, where it really doesn't matter, if you have the right credentials. It doesn't really matter if you have, password login and you're on their computer. If you don't act like the person who's supposed to be on the other end of that terminal, then it doesn't matter. So talk to us about what exactly, or how you protect, these institutions.
Yes. So the way that we would protect institutions like this is they would deploy our software onto their web portals and onto their native mobile applications. Anywhere their employees, their customers are logging in to affect some sort of a transaction. And we're doing these, as we talked earlier, we're measuring all these, several hundred different signals that we can pick up in a customer interaction to make sure that it's the right person at the keyboard, not just the right computer connecting in with the right credentials. And so when we look at things like, these Trojans, like we saw with the silence attacks, you can observe the credentials being put in. You can get the actual correct credentials, but the cadence in which they're put in, the speed, the confidence, the error rate of the username and the password being entered, the dwell time between key clicks, the amount of time the key is held down before it's released, those are all very unique sub-second sort of signals that we can pick up about that consumer's interaction that the fraudster has no way of collecting nor remitting in a way that would allow them to bypass analytics. Now, looking at how they use the keyboard, using the tab key to move between form fields like the username to password, or using the mouse, also very unique to an individual human. So you layer all these data points together, you get a very clear picture that this biological human belongs to this account access. And that's really hard to mimic. And the funny part, the interesting part, not really funny, the interesting part is that if you were to actually record all those signals in full fidelity and play them back, it'd be a perfect match to a previous session, which is statistically impossible for a human. And so you really have put together a layered solution that keeps the replay attacks from happening and makes it very difficult for an attacker to emulate the real user. And again, it's all transparent. So the customer, the employee, no one had to do anything different to get the security. They just did the thing they normally did, was log in and transact. But also along that same lines, Trojan-based attacks don't have physical keyboard mouse interactions that a typical transaction would have within the four walls of a company. So if this malware, this Trojan is being used to launch an attack from the desktop of the individual, their credentials just being pasted into the form fields on that computer, and interactions happening without any sort of computer human interaction that can be determined, also indicates some really high risk activities that wouldn't normally be there. So you can look at behavior, you can look at input, you can look at all these signals about the consumer or the employee to understand whether or not you're dealing with the right person, and that goes a long way to defeating these sort of attack vectors.
And just real quick, I mean, I have run into this with other institutions, not banking. I'm not really familiar with too much about banking, but video games certainly something I do.
Yep.
And Blizzard, very well known for always going after people who are using bots to play their games, and
Yep.
they don't much like talking publicly about how they actually catch the people who are, illegally doing bots and things like that, because they don't want people to know exactly what they're doing, how they're doing it, and then bypass it. You don't seem to have the same fear, or, obviously you're not going into extreme detail here, but, you seem pretty confident that this is something that you can't replicate. Even if you know how NuData Security works, it's something that would be almost impossible to break.
Yeah, nothing's impossible to break. Let's
almost
be clear
almost impossible.
Anyone who just spent 5 minutes in the security trenches knows that there's no silver bullet here. But having a layered solution that really focuses in on individual consumer signals and behaviors, not things that they have to do, but things they always do, gives you a bit of a leg up because you're passive. People don't know you're there. Gives you a leg up because the natural variability in human interactions guards against replay attacks when you're looking at the right signals and analyzing past sessions to the current one. And frankly, I'm not going into the depth of the technologies that are deployed in the solution,
right.
So not to completely tip the hand, right? Of course, but give you a consumable version of some of the signals to better understand how the technology works without getting into the inner workings. So I'm confident because it isn't just a single faceted solution that you can get past by stealing someone's SIM card in order to get their SMS messages. It's a very diverse set of layers of technologies to truly understand who's connecting up to the system.
So obviously this had to have gone through many months of development. Talk to us about the success rate, because for the end user, security is only as valuable as people tend to use it, and if it can get in the way, I'm sure businesses themselves find it a waste of productivity. If the end user keeps having to say no, I really am me, here's my 18-digit PIN number, I swear I am me. Like how has the authentication of individual users evolved? Is it seamless?
It is, and interestingly enough, technologies like this are useful for reducing the impact of security on consumers. And so you get challenge fatigue, being challenged by text messages and SMS, and got to pull out the PIN code in every single login. That gets really difficult for consumers who just want to check their bank balance or just want to do a quick payment transfer to settle up a dinner bill with their friends, during the holidays. They don't want to go through all this additional friction. So whatever we can do to reduce that friction and provide an understanding this is the good user means we're actually reducing the impact on those users to a large extent. Today, most of the systems assume that it's the bad user unless otherwise specified. And in that case, you get a lot of challenges to those consumers. Every time they log in, the IP addresses change, challenge them. They get a new phone for Christmas, challenge them. The moon isn't aligned correctly, challenge them. And you get these consumers who just get really tired of having to add 10 to 30, maybe 45 seconds to the login process in order to do some challenge that puts them through all these different hoops, whether that's CAPTCHAs or SMS messages that they have to type in the PIN codes on, or anything else.
I'll be honest. I was trying to use a service, like it wasn't even like crucial. Like if I lost access to this thing, I would not give two shakes about. But
Right.
they tried to verify me using like every square that has a sign in it, mark it. I failed 12 times, and eventually there's like, we don't even think you're human at this point. It hurt.
Yeah.
It hurt my feelings. And just real quick, I mean, Robert, would you mind staying over just for a couple minutes so we can wrap this up?
Yeah.
All right, perfect. So everyone, we'll be right back. Mr. Robert Capps, he is the Vice President of NuData Security. Everyone, Computer America, more right after this.
We are all Brother Wolf. 10 years ago, a group of locals banded together to create positive change. We took animals into our homes, held adoption events at local retailers, and talked to the community about our mission to help build a no-kill Asheville. A decade later, we have achieved so many victories for animals in need. There's been so much progress, yet there's still so much to do. As part of our year-long celebration, we encourage you to become a member of our special Compassionate Circle program. With a monthly donation of $10 or more, you will have behind-the-scenes access to the work we are doing at Brother Wolf. Our goal is to reach 1,000 members because we receive no government funding. Working together, we can help build and sustain no-kill communities. Learn more at compassionatecircle.bwar.org. We are a 501c3 tax-deductible organization.
And welcome back to the Computer America Show. See, only a minute. And yeah, we are 31 minutes past the hour as we continue on here with our guest. He is Mr. Robert Capps. He is the Authentication Strategist and Vice President of NuData Security, talking all about, really financial institutions and how to verify end users, and I'm sure even their own employees. And again, Robert, to pick up where we left off, like I said, sometimes these companies seem to get overzealous, and even the true end user can't even verify themselves. I've had it happen to me. Yep. I'm sure many people out there have done the same. Let's talk about, obviously there's a lot of these little, things that you track. Is this a possible solution to passwords, PIN numbers, and other authentication? Or is this like two-factor authentication where it's going to run, but you still do everything else?
Wow. There's like two questions there. So this is a type of technology that works harmoniously with whatever authentication technique is in place that requires consumer interaction. There's been a lot of talk for a number of years, probably since I got into this industry in the early to mid 90s, about how we're going to get rid of usernames and passwords, and we're just going to seamlessly identify consumers. 20 some odd years in this industry, and that just hasn't happened yet. And I don't see a replacement for username and password yet on the horizon that's also usable, right? There's a lot of technology that has promise of being able to identify consumers with zero friction and without any memorized information, but none of them have supplanted the username and password process that we have today. And so anything we can do to lengthen the usefulness of that existing paradigm that's long overdue for replacement helps us in finding basically the time and the bandwidth to replace these systems once and for all with real technology and improvements that will cause us to be able to basically move away from that username and password process. We're just not there yet.
Right, and it's going to be quite a while because, again, we've seen a lot of different, Apple just moved over to the face identification. Samsung still has the iris scan. None of these has taken the entire industry by storm, and from the sounds of it, it seems like almost nothing will. It's going to be a mixture of these things. So, and I have to ask this because, banking the way it is, we've seen a lot of companies lose information about the customer, and obviously you are going to be building up a profile on individual users to compare actions, before and after, and how they type, everything you mentioned before. That would be, I don't want to say completely bad to lose. I mean, obviously you don't want to lose any data, and there'd be things like keystrokes and things like that you could lose. How is this data stored? Would this data be usable by anyone who had access to it, or is it only for your system? It would only make sense to NuData Security.
Yeah, so there's some of the operational security components that we, of course, wouldn't talk about in a situation like this. But what the types of data that get collected and analyzed in a situation like this are non-personal identifiable. So knowing that you generally average a typing speed of 32.4 words per minute doesn't indicate that you're Ben or I'm Robert. But it's one data point that can combine with other data points that we can analyze in real time, could identify that this sort of trait belongs to an individual account holder who's logging into their account. And so from that perspective, the data is pretty much gibberish and useless when it comes to theft and reuse. Mm-hmm. It's just signal data. It doesn't indicate that it's Robert or it's Ben or it's Jack or Jane. It just indicates that these sort of data points correlate or don't correlate. And that goes a long ways to being able to maintain security in the face of data breaches, because the data, even if it were stolen, isn't really useful to anyone. Right. You'd still have to figure out how to emulate those behaviors and to look like that consumer with enough fidelity to be able to bypass those systems. And if we think anything's amiss, we push those consumers through the normal challenge mechanisms they go through today, whether that's SMS or pulling out the token and reading off the 6 or 8 digit rotating password, or referring the transactions back to an analyst within the back office of a financial services organization to do a more thorough vetting and call the customer. And so it isn't about being the firewall, being the brick wall that bad things fall up against. It's identifying what additional remediation needs to take place, whether that's technology or human, before the transaction is allowed to go through. And that sort of variability allows you to even operate in the face of massive data breaches. As we've seen with the major credit bureau breaches that we've seen to date, it's pretty safe to assume that if you have a pulse today, you've been breached in some way, shape, or form. Even those who aren't old enough to have a credit card or be online, their data has been stolen in some way, shape, or form. So we have to assume that data is compromised at every interaction with the consumer that is non-face-to-face. And if we can, as an industry, start doing that, looking for solutions to go beyond static data verification, which is what we've fallen back to many, many times in the past as an organization, or as an industry. If we can do that, at the beginning of building out business processes and technology. Those things are going to have a lot longer lifespan, or potentially an indefinite lifespan, when those products get to market for consumers, because they're resistant to the attacks that we're seeing today.
Right. So we have this final question here, and I'm kind of on the fence on how I want to word this, because we have here, can banks restore customer online trust? And I just got to say that as someone that uses online banking, it's been one of my favorite things about banks, because I get to see, that I have money still. It hasn't been stolen by someone, and it's convenient, easy, things like that. I still don't trust it. I will probably never trust that my money will always be there and no one else is accessing it. I make it a habit every couple of days at least to go and look at transactions, see if those are my transactions, and I don't take anything for granted. Do we need to get to a point where everyone can kind of just say, well, it's in my bank and it's safe forever, I don't have to worry about it? Or do you think a certain level of just double checking is just a good practice?
Yeah, and the famous words that come to mind immediately are trust but verify. Yeah. You can trust the bank. If you're doing online banking today, you trust the bank in some way, shape, or form. If you're depositing money in an account with the bank today, you're trusting them in some way, shape, or form. Maybe that's because they have FDIC or the credit union equivalent of deposit insurance. Whether that's because they have really impressive looking vaults behind their the teller line, or they've never had a breach publicly disclosed, you have trust in them for some way, or you keep your money in your mattress. I think the bigger issue we have here is not necessarily restoring trust, because I think at some level the trust is always there with those financial institutions if they have customers. It's how do you get those customers that don't trust the technology innately to become online banking customers? I had, I can share a personal story of getting my parents involved with online banking. They didn't trust banking on a computer. They wanted to walk into a branch and talk to a teller and hand the cash over and get a receipt in physical form. They didn't trust doing digital transactions. And that's a tremendous number of people in the industry or in the community today. And so how do we expand our utilization of these really great technologies that frankly allow you to have a much closer view of your financial health and transactions than waiting for a statement to come in 30 to 45 days. Because by then it's too late. If you can get an alert right now on your phone that someone has just initiated a bill payment in your account for $700, someone you've never heard of before, keeping that money from leaving your account is much easier to do now with that message than it would be waiting for the statement to come in 30 to 45 days and figuring out where the money went. And so digital technologies really allow for the consumers to take control of their financial security versus waiting for the bank to do something for them.
Makes perfect sense. And I guess all of this, again, just another added layer of, security. And again, you can check it out. By the way, just real quick, I see here NuData Security, a MasterCard company. Obviously, MasterCard would be very interested in keeping fraudulent transactions from happening.
Yes.
What is exactly the relationship, just real quick, with MasterCard?
So we were acquired this spring. So we were an independent company until April of this year, and MasterCard acquired our organization based on the strong results and the technologies that we brought to market. So we're now a fully owned organization of MasterCard.
All right, and another thing would be when can an end user, or will an end user, will they ever be alert of your services, or is this something that these companies, MasterCard or anyone, are they going to start using, and it's just going to be something that the end user is never really going to know that you're doing it?
Yeah, I mean, financial institutions and other organizations that use products like ours, security products, they don't tend to publicize those products in use. And so a consumer today is logging into online banking or going to a large retailer or booking travel online, probably is unaware of all the security technologies that are analyzing their spend patterns, their purchase patterns, their access patterns, when they log in, what types of places they like looking at, what products they like to buy, who the payees are on transactions. These are all data points that are analyzed in real time by everybody in the ecosystem just to keep safety and security in check for those consumers, to keep their accounts safe and to keep the transactions secure. Those typically aren't called out for individual checkboxes and authorization because they're permissible use in almost every locality's regulations around consumer privacy and security. So in most cases, consumers aren't aware of the technologies in use that are protecting them every day, mostly because that's how you keep them safe,
Right.
secure, and effective, is by not publicizing their use. In a lot of cases, you'll see some of the stuff called out in the terms of services that are published by website owners. Online banks in particular will cover some of those technologies in very broad strokes. But you can assume, if you're doing transactions online, that products like ours or other products in the marketplace are being used to keep them secure.
All right, and last question is, in the next 5 years or so, how do you see? And this can be very hard to kind of predict, but how do you see your product in terms of cybersecurity? How do you see that advancing? Or, is it just perfecting what you already have and more data points? Artificial intelligence, blah blah blah, other buzzwords. Is it just perfecting what you have, or do you see some kind of advancement on the horizon that's gonna just change everything?
I think that we're going to see a lot of evolution in the industry when it comes to security, and there'll be some revolution. I think that at some point we're going to find a replacement for usernames and passwords that's pervasive and doesn't fall back to username and password to do enrollment of devices and prove identity and things like that. My crystal ball is a little cloudy as to what those things are going to be at this point. But the financial stakes and the risk to consumers and consumer trust will require both evolutionary and revolutionary changes to security technologies and such. And I think that what's going to happen is people have recognized that the more challenges, the more friction they put in front of the customers, the more revenue they avoid creating. And so I think the biggest prediction we'll see is that security will meld into the things they do every day without adding more friction, unless there's concern that they aren't the right person. And I think that's the path that we've taken. I think that's going to be the path of the industry, because that's the sort of thing that allows usable security and actual security to develop in harmony versus what we have today.
I'll be honest, just as someone who covers, the day-to-days and, what is announced publicly, that's 2016 was pretty bad for antivirus and things like that and hacking, whereas 2017, this whole year, it's been, you're right. At this point, if you have a Pulse, a social security number, or, do any kind of transactions in the United States, if it wasn't Equifax, it was going to be Sonic, between those two, that's probably all of America. Yeah, you've been hacked. And so, but like I said, way at the beginning, it's a game of cat and mouse. It's, it's an arms race, who does it better. And yeah, I think you have a pretty good field and a pretty good company to, to work with. So, Robert, I'll give you last word. If people want to find out more or anything that we missed, where can people go? What do they need to know?
Sure. Yeah. So where they can go if they want to know more information about NuData Security, that's our website, and that's spelled NuDataSecurity.com, NuDataSecurity.com, and you can definitely get more information there. And I would just remind the listeners that are listening right now. All is not lost. Your information may be out there, but there are steps you can take to protect yourself. Credit freezes and monitoring and those sort of things, which are I wouldn't say are things you do in response to data breaches, but they're good practice to understand what's going on records that are being kept on you or on your behalf. And just understand that this is the more data that's out there, the less likely you as an individual are going to be singled out to have your data used. And so there's more data out there today than can be used by anyone, and that in itself creates a bit of security for any individual user. Your probability of being hit because of your data being compromised is much lower. So it's not all dire. Please continue what you've been doing, and just keep an eye on your records and your accounts, and take responsibility for your financial security, and you're going to be better off than the majority of other consumers who just are ignoring the problem.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that is, it's surprising how many times we hear that with security experts. Is it's not about making yourself bulletproof, it's making yourself a little bit harder than your next door neighbor or someone you don't care about. Make yourself a little bit harder and you'll be okay. So very good
Indeed.
words of advice. And again, Robert, I want to say thank you for coming on. This was a different side of cybersecurity we have yet to hear about, so happy to have you on. And again, thanks. And good luck in 2018. It's going to be a wild ride.
You too.
All right, have a good one. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, everyone. So there he goes. And again, NuData Security, we have a link to that directly at computeramerica.com. You can check that out. There's right there on the homepage. Stay up there for the 10 days. And by the way, speaking of computeramerica.com, now we do usually move into computer and technology news, which we will in just a moment. But one thing I want to make mention of is the fact that we have a new article up at Computer America. And this is an article which was written by yours truly, all about net neutrality, because it's, last Thursday it was repealed, and, there's a lot of things happening in the space of net neutrality, what it means now that it has been repealed, and what you need to know. So because I was getting a little tired of talking exactly about it, I now have a one-stop shop. It's, a medium-sized article that you can go and read, and it explains what it was, what it tried to do, what it can no longer do, and what the next steps are. Essentially, let's see, the article is named Net Neutrality Repealed, What Happens Now? And yeah, give that a check out right there on our homepage, and big net neutrality logo. And I believe it's on the sidebar to the right. But yeah, check that out. And hey, there are things that you can still do if you want to support net neutrality. If you're against net neutrality for whatever reason, there's a comment section and you can tell me why I am so wrong. Please feel free to. But again, check that out. And, there has been some developments. Definitely worth checking out. So in the meantime, though, we are going to be doing computer and technology news. And this is brought to you by Fire Dragon Security. So here we go. Computer and technology news. So we have time for a couple of different articles, maybe one or two. And yeah, let's do this one real quick because it's it's pretty interesting. So at this point, no one should be confused about facial recognition. It depending on the service that is doing it, it can target anywhere from like a basic like 16 or so to like 30 to 40 to however many data points of your face you can have. Well, this article coming from Quartz, it's a little sad and at the same time very weird. So again, Quartz and written by Chase Purdy, saying that if you live in a city. Wait, by the way, the article is titled "A Chinese Company is Developing Facial Recognition for Organic Chickens." So you can make sure that the chicken that you're eating is, was from a particular place. So, saying that if you live in a city but still want to look deep into the eyes of your dinner, well, you're in luck. Where thanks to blockchain technology, and blockchain, by the way, same, cryptocurrencies usually, it's what people associate it with, but it's simply a large ledger that verifies every transaction, going back to forever. So blockchain, essentially, you add blocks onto a chain of linked transactions. And it can be used for many things other than basic currency, but for many technology. So here we go. Blockchain technology being developed by Chinese insurance tech company Zhang An Online, people will soon be able to use facial recognition technology to track organically farmed chickens they've pre-purchased. If you didn't catch that, Chinese insurance tech company will be facial recognition tracking organically grown chickens. This is why China is up and coming, because they use their technology in very, very important ways. So they will also be able to monitor the bird's movements in real time through GPS tracking bracelets attached to the bird's legs. So yes, the birds will also be monitored. So welcome to the brave new world of farm-to-table eating in the 21st century. So you can not only know what it looked like, its name, what it walked like, and everything before you eat it, well, now you can be sure it's that chicken. So Zhong'an is building the program called Go Chicken as a way for health-conscious city slickers to follow the life cycle of their food, giving them an illusory experience of being just a little less displaced from a food system that is increasingly out of sight of most. So right now, only 100,000 birds have been outfitted with the GPS bracelets, but the Shanghai-based company plans to incorporate about 23 million birds into the project over the next 3 years. You hear that, folks? Mass adoption by the chickens. Man, what a willing set of participants. So they said that pushing the Internet of Things onto Chinese farms, according to the South China Morning Post. Folks, this article alone is a great example of what the Internet of Things really means. Because I've been giving, and I'm probably going to keep this for later on, for later shows, we've been talking about when articles of clothing, when your appliances at home, when your home security system, your front door, your camera, your lighting system, of course, your computers and your cell phones and things like that. But, water sensors in your attic that tell you if your roof is leaking, all these little data points, the Internet of Things, that's one thing. But then take this, for example, 23 million birds are going to be outfitted with GPS tracking bracelets and monitoring bracelets, where now farms are going to be using millions of connected devices. Folks, when you think about, maybe sensors attached to the farming equipment, maybe sensors attached to, maybe any kind of grain or feed or things like that, silos, you could think of, a couple thousand sensor possibilities. But then you add in birds, you add in actually tracking the livestock. It shows how robust the internet is going to have to become if things like this are going to be possible. And again, 23 million birds in the next 3 years, the internet is going to have to expand in a lot of ways. So just think about that, So once inducted into the Go-Go chicken system, the free-range birds will be attached to devices that track their movement and what kind of food they ate. So yeah, you're really going to know this bird before you sink your teeth into it. And because these chickens are slow grown, they'll live for 4 to 6 months as opposed to the 45 days of most factory farm chickens. And the facial recognition technology will ensure that anyone who buys one of these birds will be able to actually see the chicken from their smartphone. All right, a little creepy, but technology that can recognize an animal's face is not new, where Google has been using it to identify pets in people's photos. That's something that Google and even Apple has started to do with your smartphone cameras and all your saved photos. It can actually identify individuals, people, as well as, of course, pets. So I believe they're working on landscapes too. Anywho, Zhongyan is trying to take advantage of the growing farm-based tourism trend in China, where city dwellers take weekend trips out to farms where they can interact with food animals, and that the company has said that its technology is a tool for members of China's surging middle class who are also concerned about food safety and want to keep closer tabs on the sources of what they eat, and that those anxieties spread rapidly in China after a 2014 crisis in which a supplier for McDonald's and KFC was caught selling expired meat to the fast food chains. So obviously this is a very Chinese problem with a very Chinese solution, but it's very interesting. It's a very interesting prospect to think that technology can bring people closer to their food source. It's technology has a lot of promises. This was one I was not thinking of. So I believe we have time for just one more quick story. Let's see if we can decide which one. All right. How about we do this one? Uber. You've heard of them. They do car things. And here's an article from Engadget saying that Uber lands on BlackBerry Messenger, confusing everyone. So the next time that you whip out your BlackBerry Messenger, you'll be able to order an Uber from within the app, which would be handy if anyone still used BlackBerry Messenger. By the way, again, Engadget, and we have Saqib Shah to thank for this, saying that it's evidently a thing where, at least in parts of Asia, the Middle East, and Africa anyway, so not even the US, but other places. Saying that elsewhere, BlackBerry's baby has been long forgotten, but now more than 2 years after Facebook Messenger got Uber integration, BlackBerry Messenger is catching up. And as he says, better late than never. And that the app, which is also available for iOS and Android, is run by Indonesian telecom MTech. And they said that about 60 million users, 60 million users in Indonesia alone, making it a leading chat app in a country of 260 million people. This technology is still used by people in the world. Who knew? Crazy. Crazy. And the country is also witnessing a surge in ride-hailing business and will account for about 40% of the industry in the entire Southeast Asian region, with 5 billion on the cards this year. And they said that Uber, which lags behind local rivals Grab and Gojek, clearly sees BlackBerry Messenger as an untapped customer base. So, to cater to low-end drivers and overcome spotty connections, the BlackBerry Messenger team up relies on Uber's web-based app. So, there you have it, folks. If you use BlackBerry Messenger, finally, and you're in Africa or Southeast Asia, you can now hail an Uber from the messaging app. Weird. All right, everyone, we're just about done, and be sure to tune in tomorrow. Oh, and folks, just to make sure you know, this week will be the last week that we have live shows for this year. We will be back January 2nd. Remember, January 2nd, 2018, we'll be back with all new shows. Happy to do that for you. And, but yeah, this week, Monday through Friday, live shows, and then next week, no shows. So pay attention to that. But once again, thank you, NuData Security, for joining us. And tomorrow, be sure to tune in for Mr. Scott Schober. He is our cybersecurity expert. He is a correspondent for Computer America and always fun. Folks, can't wait to see you here. Thank you for tuning in, and yeah, catch you next time. Everyone, again, go check out that article on net neutrality. Go do it. And thank you so much. Everyone, have a great day. Bye-bye.